Good evening. On behalf of the Economics Graduate Student Union, the Peace Studies Program, and the Department of Sociology, I welcome you to the American University. I would like to mention beforehand, before we get started here, that we have a few of Noam Chomsky's books on sale in the back lobby, so if you like, after the talk, you can go back there, $10 a piece, it's a bargain. Noam Chomsky is well known, and is usually introduced as the world's best-known linguist, as a noted critic of U.S. foreign policy, and as the author of dozens of books whose subject matter range from Cartesian linguistics and semantics and generative grammar to U.S. foreign policy and terrorism, Central America, and the Middle East. He should also be introduced as a regular columnist for Zeta magazine, as a prolific letter writer, spinning out an average of 15,000 words a week in correspondence, and as a speaker who is usually scheduled 2 years in advance. He is a tireless advocate of dissident movements and projects around the world, lending his time and seemingly beyond human capability, and without the slightest expectation of reciprocation. He is the most frequently misquoted, misinterpreted, censured, and censored writer by intellectuals and elite opinion makers in the East as well as in the West. Dr. Chomsky is also a summertime gardener and a sailor who likes nothing more than to sail out Wellfleet Harbor for a few hours of relaxation on Cape Cod. In the final analysis, it appears that there is only one good way to introduce this extraordinary person. May I present to you Noam Chomsky.
I always get nervous when I talk in Washington because I have this sneaking suspicion that everything's penetrated by the CIA. And with all the information that Carla just had, I really am beginning to believe it. How'd you find out 15,000 words a week? Well, the title of this talk, as I suppose you saw somewhere, is Necessary Illusions, Thought Control in Democratic Societies. Can't hear me? Oh, okay. All I did so far is say something irrelevant and announce the topic. How's that? Better? The title is intended to be paradoxical. It should be. Thought control and indoctrination are inconsistent with democracy. Therefore, one can't have thought control in a democratic society. There is a standard view about this matter. The standard view is expressed, for example, by Supreme Court Justice Powell, who speaks of what he calls the societal purpose of the First Amendment, that is, enabling the public to assert meaningful control over the political process. Now, he happens to be speaking about the media and their crucial role in affecting this societal purpose. And similar remarks could be made and should be made about the educational system, about publishing, about intellectual life generally. But the media are particularly important in providing free access to information and opinion, and therefore allowing a democratic process to function in a meaningful way. So the media therefore fulfill what the New York Times on Sunday called their traditional Jeffersonian role as a counterbalance to government power. And if one takes Jefferson seriously, as he may or may not have taken himself, he would presumably have gone further, speaking not just of counterbalancing government power, but counterbalancing other concentrations of power, specifically the kinds that developed in the post-Jeffersonian period, corporate power, which is the dominant feature of modern social life. Well, all of this seems obvious, even tautological. What else could be the foundations of democracy? But it's worth bearing in mind that there is a contrary view, and it probably is the dominant view among liberal democratic theorists. It goes right back to the origins of modern democracy in the English revolutions of the 17th century, English Revolution of the 17th century. At that time, great concern was expressed over popular agitators, itinerant preachers and workers with their little printing presses and their pamphlets and their public speeches, which were removing the cloak of mystery behind which the Parliament and the King were carrying out their much narrower struggle, the one you read about in history books. Now, these people were, in their words, they were people who wanted to be represented not by lords and gentry, but by men of their own kind, men who know the people's swords, quoting from Leveler pamphlets. And observing their activities, one contemporary historian warned that by revealing the workings of power, they will make the people so curious and so arrogant that they will never find humility enough to submit to a civil rule, which is a big problem. Well after these radical Democrats had been crushed by about 1660, John Locke wrote that day laborers and tradesmen, spinsters and dairymaids must be told what to believe. The greatest part cannot know, and therefore they must believe. Now, these concerns arose once again during the American Revolution, as they typically do during popular revolutions, and it was not until the 1780s that the radical Democrats in the American Revolution were crushed, and there was no more any thought that people would be represented by people at that time, men of their own kind, who know the people's swords. They would be represented by those qualified to rule over them, of whom they were permitted to make a selection, the modern democratic political system, which follows the principle laid down by the Founding Fathers that those who own the country ought to govern it, quoting John Jay. Now, all of this comes right to the present. I won't try to go through the history, but there's a rich tradition expressing these same views, comes right down to the present. In the modern version, Reinhold Niebuhr, for example, the revered moralist and foreign policy analyst, he explained that, in his words, rationality belongs to the cool observer, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith. And this faith relies upon necessary illusion. I thank him for offering me my title. This faith relies upon necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications, which have to be provided by the myth makers, by the cool observers, folks like us, smart guys who know how to serve power. Walter Lippmann, Dean of American Journalists, a few years earlier, talked about what he called the manufacture of consent, which he said has become a self-conscious art and a regular organ of popular government in a revolution in the practice of democracy. And that's appropriate because the common interests very largely elude public opinion entirely and can be managed only by a specialized class, Niebuhr's cool observers. The same concerns explain a good deal of the fear of radical movements abroad right up to the present. So, for example, in the early 19th century, the Tsar of Russia was deeply concerned about the contagion of revolutionary ideas coming from American democracy, which might undermine the conservative world order that he and Metternich and others were presiding over. And a century later, the roles were reversed, but the same ideas were expressed. At the time when Woodrow Wilson sent troops to join the Western intervention against the Bolsheviks, his Secretary of State, echoing the Tsar a century earlier, warned that the Bolsheviks were appealing, I'm quoting Robert Lansing, were appealing to the proletariat of all countries, to the ignorant and mentally deficient, who by their very numbers are urged to become masters. Now, that intervention, the Western and U.S. intervention in Russia, is often described as defensive by contemporary diplomatic historians, John Lewis Gaddis to mention a recent case. And there's a sense in which they're right. There's a sense in which the intervention was defensive, and it's expressed by these views. It was in defense of privilege against the ignorant masses at home who might have gotten the wrong ideas from these radical developments abroad. and not surprisingly, the defensive intervention, which involved sending troops to the Soviet Union in defense against the ignorant masses at home, coincided with a harsh repression at home to undermine labor, freedom of speech, independent politics, Woodrow Wilson's Red Scare, which was very strongly supported by the media through the most tyrannical phase. In short, the function of the herd is to do their work in silence and not to interfere in serious matters. Now, there's also what's sometimes called the political class, the minority of people who are articulate and educated and can get involved in political affairs. And that minority also is in need of necessary illusions, maybe even more so than the ignorant and stupid masses. The point is to ensure that they can do their work of political